Hello and welcome to our third installment of the Vanguard weekly video series and podcast. I'm your host David Greenwald, the editor and director of the Davis Vanguard, where you can get your daily news in Davis and Yolo County at davisvanguard.org. So today we're going to talk about the opioid epidemic. Experts are calling this one of the worst drug epidemics in U.S. history. And that's even with prescriptions for addictive opioids falling between 2012 and 2015, the most recently available for full year of data. Part of our question today is, what does this epidemic look like here in Yolo County? What is the county and local law enforcement going to do about it? And what are our major areas of concern, and what should we be doing that we are not? This week, our guests are Davis Police Lieutenant Paul Doroshov. We have Kailei Jo Johnson, a citizen who has experienced the difficulties of the epidemic. Originally, we were going to have Ron Chapman from the Public Health Department for Yolo County, but at the last moment, his daughter is in surgery, and so he couldn't make it. So stepping in for him is Tia Will, a retired obstetrician from Kaiser and a Vanguard board member. So thank you for joining us. And so let's start with Lieutenant Doroshov. Maybe you can tell us from your perspective what the epidemic looks like, at least here in Davis.
We've had for a few years now probably what we call a heroin problem. From being involved in cases and investigations, I'm getting a lot of my information from talking directly to the people that were affected by it. A lot of the, especially I call them kids, but young adults that have been addicted that we met started out with pharmaceuticals, either a prescription to them or a prescription to a loved one for pain management, and ultimately developed. And as pharmaceuticals became harder to get, heroin's not. And I think the production and the importation of heroin is on the rise because marijuana is being legalized. So, like any market, the drug market adjusts. So, as a police department, I think we have a role to play. I think there's no way to arrest yourself out of the problem because really the problem is so multifaceted, and a lot of it is medical. There's certainly a crime component. A lot of our heroin issue drives our property crime, which is for stealing because people need their fix, so they have to steal in order to afford that and make that happen. But again, I think it's kind of people call it the drug war or the opiate war. I think war is a very bad term to use. It's really kind of a complex social problem that needs an approach from a lot of different angles.
And what does the typical opioid abuser look like, if there is a typical?
I don't think you can put a face on a typical opioid abuser. We've seen everything from lower income to upper middle class, all races, all ethnic groups. It's just a powerful drug, and the addiction, from my understanding and talking to people afflicted, is very, very difficult to treat.
And what can you speak to this?
I can speak to that a bit because I take part in some social media discussions on the opioid addiction crisis, and unfortunately lots of times the people I communicate with believe they have a stereotypical idea that this is someone shooting up in an abandoned building or something like that. But what we've seen is a real change in the demographics. We've seen people coming in who originally got addicted by being given post-surgical drugs. We have people who are veterans who are dealing with PTSD and other complex issues, as well as chronic physical pain problems. We have older people who maybe started on their road toward drug addiction back earlier, say in the 90s, early 2000s, when there was still a lot more prescribing being going on because doctors weren't being trained that you couldn't get people in trouble in managing pain with opioids as long as you weren't prescribing hundreds of them. But no, actually a very short term, a very brief prescription will be enough for some people because people are so different in their susceptibility.
And Kailei, maybe you can share kind of your experience.
Well, it's not necessarily my experience. It was my daughter's dad. He had an accident when he was a teenager, and it was a medical mistake. He went in for some stomach pain, and they said he needed appendix out. They went, took him, had his appendix out. I guess while the doctors were doing so, he was leaning against a tool or something, ended up cutting the artery to his right leg. They took him, they didn't know they did it, and he died, and they went back into surgery and fixed it, and then he ended up several months later having so much damage to that leg that they had to amputate from right below the knee. He was on prescription pain pills for a very long time, and that's where it all started. I met him shortly after he had had his leg amputated, and I knew that he was taking the pills. I did notice that it seemed like he was taking too many pills. And I was a teenager myself. I got pregnant with my daughter that we shared together shortly after meeting him, and I just watched him go downhill from there. And I knew something more was going on after my daughter was born, and about the time she was about a year or so, I found heroin. He had graduated. He struggled for a very long time with heroin and then alcohol, and it was difficult to watch because you could see the change in them physically. You could see the change that he was losing his mind at the very end, and he died 3 years ago. Yesterday was his birthday. It was really difficult because he didn't overdose, but his drug is directly related to the use of the opiates. He had overdosed a couple times, and 6 months before he died was one of them. He was with his friends. I don't know the exact story, but basically they got him to shoot up, and he overdosed, and they were scared, and they dropped his body off in front of an emergency room, I think here in Davis, and just hoped someone was going to find him, and luckily somebody did, and they were able to save him then. But he had received brain damage from that, and 6 months later he had seizures after that, like frequently, and then 6 months later he had a seizure. His parents tried to get him to go to the emergency room, and he's like, no, I didn't have a seizure, I'm fine. And they're like, yes, you did. And then he had a second seizure, and he had bit his tongue almost all the way through. And so they got him to say, okay, I'll go to the emergency room. And on the way there, he had a third seizure, and his heart stopped. And they revived him at the hospital, but he just wouldn't stop seizing. And after a week, we had to decide to, take him off the machines because they saw that there was so much brain damage that even if he were to wake up, it wouldn't have been a life worth living. And the irony in the whole story is he had actually gotten clean. He had finally made the steps after all those years to get clean, and he was almost all the way off alcohol too. And it just goes to show you, your problems don't end when the drugs are gone. And people don't realize, because doctors give these to people every day, because he was doing the pills and the heroin. It was whatever opiate he could get. Right. And I'm guilty of contributing in the early part of it because I received a prescription for drugs, the Norcos and things like that for chronic pain, and he'd call me and beg me for him, and sometimes I would give him to him until I finally realized, I'm killing him, and I couldn't do it anymore. But it's just, I'm guilty of selling pills in the past to people, so it's I know more than one dynamic of this whole thing, and it's an ugly thing, and people want to say it's a choice. It's not a choice, because I can tell you right now that he did not want to live that way. He was not happy with himself. He was not happy with who he was. His daughter, he was a great dad. You couldn't ask for a better dad. But he had that going on, and it was too much for my daughter to see. So it all started with a prescription that he was given by doctors, and now he's gone. My daughter has to live without her dad, and we have to deal with the aftermath, and it's a little bit unfair. And I think that they started treating him like an addict at a point, you know, like they didn't treat him like a person anymore. They just treated him like an addict. Like he was just pill seeking, and his conditions, you know, like whatever he was going through, it wasn't real, and they just didn't even want to give him the time of day. And I don't think that that's fair to him, because what he's dealing with is because of them, you know. So he's suffering because of your guys' mistake, and you guys are going to treat him like he's a nobody. And I think that if they would have treated him more like an addict, like gotten him help, because there wasn't a lot of help for him, especially with insurance and things like that. You know, rehab costs money, and there's not a lot of help for people like him. He wasn't on Medi-Cal and stuff like that, so it's like he doesn't have anywhere to go for help.
And that's, you know, I want to throw into that a little bit. And I was really surprised in this business finding out how unavailable and how expensive real rehab is. I don't have the stats, I only have anecdotal information, but it's pretty amazing that it's not as easy to get that help that people think it is.
And the help, may I just elaborate a little more? The help that is available is highly variable in quality. I was recently reading an article on homes that are established that are supposedly to help addicts. This particular article was about Florida. And what they really do is they are really money-making schemes.
Yes.
And people don't really recover there. So when you have a true treatment facility that is focused on making the diagnosis, making the complete assessment of the person, the family, and all their needs, and then a rehabilitative unit, many times when you have complex issues like you were describing, you may need inpatient care for part of this. This is tremendously expensive, because some of these hospitalizations can run $150,000 or more, and then that doesn't even begin to include the post-hospitalization care that can go on for years.
I think that's one of the biggest problems, is there's not adequate treatment for this, because you can't do 30 days for a heroin addict. You can't.
Right.
I'm sorry, it just doesn't work. You know, it's a long process for heroin. You know, maybe weed or something like that, you can get away with the 30 days. But heroin, it's a long process, and it's so expensive. It's so expensive.
And traditionally, we haven't really geared our resources that way. You had hearkened back to the war on drugs as opposed to the treatment for the illness that is addiction.
Absolutely.
Well, until we treat it, I mean, what we deal with, for the most part, in the criminality of it, is a symptom of the underlying disease, which is the addiction issue. And you can keep doing it all night long, and I think there's a place for police to do that. But certainly, if you're not dealing with the core issue, you know, it's ineffective.
Well, how do treatment programs that the court orders, either through PC 1000 or, you know, sometimes they'll send somebody as a condition of release to a residential treatment program? I mean, how are those funded?
That I don't know. I'm assuming there's some county funding for it, and I can't give you an intelligent answer to that, unfortunately. I just know that if somebody walked up off the street to me and told me, I'm a heroin addict, I need help right now, I would be hard-pressed to find them that help. And that part is sad.
That's kind of the thing, is like, unless you're sent to a rehab through court for a crime or something, or you have money and medical insurance that's going to cover that kind of stuff, there is really nothing you can do. Like, there are no options. I mean, I think Salvation Army and things like that sometimes, but I think that also is a lot of that is linked to, you know, like county programs and stuff like that too. So it's like you basically have to commit a crime to get that kind of help, or you have to have really good medical insurance.
And Dr. Will may correct me, I may be wrong, but speaking to somebody's addict, I mean, you know, this addiction has to be looked at more as a chronic disease, because it's a lifelong struggle.
It is.
Absolutely.
And so therefore, you can't just go into a 30-day treatment, come out and be okay. Recidivism is almost assured that they're going to, you know, relapse.
Well, and there's another component of that, because their subsequent medical care can be very, very difficult to manage, because of course if you have a legitimate need for a narcotic pain medication, say an open abdominal surgery, in people who have a previous addiction, it's extremely difficult to manage their pain. Now, there are surgical techniques, anesthesia techniques that have gotten better, but we're nowhere near beyond that not being a major problem.
Yeah.
The other issue that I actually wanted to ask you two about, because I don't know that much about this, but not only did the demographics seem to have changed, but how people can get their drugs seems to have changed. Because the things that we seem to openly acknowledge is that some are brought in cross-border, some are through prescription. And the thing I'd like to see if anyone knows about is online ordering, because I know that that is an issue also.
That is an issue. The only thing with that is that a lot of times you're not getting what you think you're getting.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that that has caught on with a lot of people. And a lot of people have gotten sick because of whatever it is they do end up getting. You know, because when you order from these other countries, you know, they say, oh, you're getting these Norcos or these Oxycontin or these whatever, and you know, you get them and they look similar, but a lot of times they're placebo or they're something completely different, you know, something you're allergic to by, you know, you never know, and it's dangerous, and I think a lot of people have caught on to that.
I think the biggest issue there is not, okay, if they give you placebo, that's bad because you're going to realize it and you're going to have to, you know, find a new fix. But some of the substances that are available are cut with something maybe very much stronger.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Like
fentanyl was, yeah. And so you might use your usual amount that seems safe and have it kill you.
Yeah, that did happen, I believe, with that here in Sacramento or somewhere around here.
It happened in Sacramento quite a few times.
Yeah, somebody had done that, and they had pills, but they thought that they were the Norco or Vicodin or something, and they were at their fentanyl. And a lot of people overdosed and died.
Enforcement's very complicated because, you know, our dynamic in Davis has always been we've tried to go after dealers that are feeding into Davis larger amounts, but then what happens is you have a network of people that are users, and those amounts start getting broken up, and then the users start to deal them in order to support their habit. So it's not that, you know, it's all harder than just targeting the bad guy, because who is the bad guy? So it gets complicated.
Do we see much in terms of adolescent use here, or does it tend to be a slightly older population?
There may be. We generally get our information by the time people are young adults. In fact, you know, we've had a crowd that was sort of the Davis High School crowd that got older, and then we were dealing with them in their 20s. So we saw a big influx of that. Whether the adolescents use them, it's very possible. You may know, but
It's
it
all
just
ages.
doesn't reach.
I mean, it
us.
starts pretty young. Like I said, I'm guilty of in the past. I was selling pills, and it wasn't just opiates, but that was the primary one that people wanted. You know, they want the opiates, and I couldn't bring myself to do with the younger crowd, but they're there. Oh, they are definitely there, and I don't know where they learn it from. Like, if it's maybe somebody that they have in their family who they pick it up from, or I don't know, but it starts, I mean, even junior high is a primary starting spot for it, and that scares me because I have children who are in junior high, and I could not even imagine.
And so do they go from the prescription pills and eventually it just gets too hard to get them and so they go to heroin?
Yeah, they take, you know, like somebody in the family has them, or a friend has a couple, or, you know, something like that. And everybody is different. Some people can take these pills and not end up, you know, hooked. And then there's other people who take it one time and that's it for them, you know. That's the beginning of a very ugly road for them.
And that's an amazing thing, because usually with alcohol, we think of a slower progression to addiction, but just as people have different physiologic effects, some people will take an opioid and become so dysphoric or have such a bad experience with it that they basically never want to take it again. But you will have some people who will follow the traditional slower trajectory, but you will have a few outliers who they use it, and that's it.
It's a one time, and it's it for them. And it's I think opiates and heroin, and that's the scariest drug out there to me. And I think that definitely prescription pills are the gateway to that. And I think that they're way too easy to get.
And that is despite the fact that I would say, I was trying to remember when the tide started changing on opioids. I would say probably at least 10, maybe 15 years ago, the word started coming out to the medical community that opioids, even for very short-term use, were not as benign as we had thought. And so gradually, especially here in California, where we're very evidence-based in how we approach things, people started cutting back on their prescriptions, but unfortunately the cat was really out of the bag, and we had created
to write them.
and they're much less so now than
Now,
they were.
yeah, they definitely
about-
are now.
But I think that's driving part of the problem,
Yes.
because now you have a group of people who have been
Yep.
addicted, can no longer get the pills easily, and need to turn to either online, other opioids, or heroin.
Dr.
Because
Wolf,
it's cheaper.
do you mind if I ask you a question, being in the
Of course
medical
not.
field? So,
Yeah.
you know, I see a lot of TV opinions and read a lot of opinions. We as a society, it seems like there's an opinion out there that are sort of almost wired to this, that our pain management and everything goes towards pharmaceuticals so very quickly, and every problem that we have, that's always the answer. Do you, I mean, is that just talk, or is it, do you see that?
No,
Okay.
it crosses lots of areas, some of them relatively benign, this one definitely not. But it's my experience that, for instance, many people would come into me asking me for antibiotics for an obvious viral illness that they were going to have fought off in 48 hours. This, however, is very pernicious, because pain is one of the things we live with as human beings. The mentality that we should be able to take a pill that will fix it, that part is bad, but another part that is very bad is that we make it difficult to access other modalities that would help. So physical therapy is well beyond what if you don't have good insurance,
Yeah.
you're not going to get it. The same with some kind of the alternative modalities such as acupressure and acupuncture. We basically, because there wasn't much money to be made in that, we did not push that as a means, and so people don't have that kind of mindset.
Okay.
So absolutely, we tend, as Americans, we tend to want a quick fix.
Yes, I agree with that. I have chronic pain conditions, and I know in the very beginning, the doctor was so quick to start writing out a prescription, and I was like, whoa, 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 like, I'm not here for a Band-Aid, you know? And I just was so surprised at how, I mean, just like that, I mean, here you go, and now
from
they're better. They're like, I have good insurance, thankfully, and they are doing like the acupuncture and, you know, physical therapy and things like that, but I mean, it's still a $20 copay every time you go, and it's still, you know, you got to go to this place or that place, and usually it's never in town, and it
Right.
adds up. It does,
Right.
and there's not a lot of, I mean, if you have Medi-Cal or something, you know, they don't cover a whole lot of specialty anything, and that's when you get stuck with the prescriptions, because that's the easiest way to deal with it.
And from the clinician's point of view, it is very hard. Typically we run on a 15-minute schedule, and so you try to address as many needs, as many
Yeah.
issues as you can in those 15 minutes. And a lot of time there is no 15-minute solution.
No.
And things are going to be long-term. What you may end up dealing with is a patient who is now not only in pain, and through no fault of their own, but in pain, dissatisfied, and now they're angry because you are not giving them the prescription that
Yes.
they want. So it's complicated.
Yes.
No easy fixes here.
And I've noticed, I'm a Kaiser patient myself, and I've noticed a big change maybe in the last 5 years. When I first started going to Kaiser, they handed out Vicodin like it was candy. You have a pain? Oh, here, have some Vicodin. I'll never forget, it's almost 15 years ago now, but I went in with a variety of different ailments. I was having pain in my chest, and then it was my arm, and it turned out after about 5 or 6 days of getting increasingly strong doses of pain medicine, that what I really had was a blood clot. And but at first they sent me home with Tylenol with codeine, then it was Vicodin, then it was Percocet, and the problem wasn't going away. So I'm in the hospital, and they shoot me up with morphine and Percocet, and I'm still in pain. So, this is a legitimate use of pain pills.
Yeah.
It was excruciating pain, but I'm like lying there, and I'm like, wow. I'm like, so I can't smoke pot because it's illegal, and yet this stuff is completely legal and messes me up far more than pot. And the amazing thing was that I was probably on pain medicine for a month after this, and finally, as I'm taking the Percocet, I'm like, you know what, I don't want to feel like this anymore. And at that point I'm like, I can deal with a little bit of pain here rather than be groggy all day. So I was fortunate, after a month. A lot of people would probably have been addicted.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Because you develop a physical, like if you're on long-term opiate prescription, your body becomes dependent on it. Like, so even if you don't have the mindset where you want to get that high from it,
right,
your body is so accustomed to it that, I watched Will go through withdrawal one time when I first found out he had the heroin, and I had taken everything that I found, and hidden it and everything, and he was supposed to go to rehab, and I was watching him detox, and I honestly couldn't, as against it as I couldn't watch him go through that, and I actually gave him a small amount because I could not watch him be that sick. Like, it's terrible to see them like that. Terrible.
Do you, can I ask a quick question? Do you feel that, when I was in high school, people tried different things, and of course heroin was always, nobody ever touched that because of the intravenous use, but it seems like a lot of people are smoking it now.
People smoke it, they
so
snort
do you feel
liquid.
like that's more acceptable? Like,
I think so.
It's easier to try something when you go in the back room.
I think so, because you're not thinking like, oh, I'm sticking this needle in my arm, and
right,
because that's like the whole junkie, persona that people put out on people like that. But yeah, there's so many ways to take it now. Like, you can smoke it, and like some of the pills, you can smoke those. Like, I think the Percocet, maybe you put it on foil. I don't even know. It's
and it breaks down with
you. Will used to, before he was shooting up, he used to make it like you were gonna shoot up, but take the liquid and snort it through a straw. Like, there's just so many different ways to go about it. Like, some people, they put it in little pieces of like tissue paper and just swallow it. So
if it's water soluble, that would work.
Right. Yeah. So I think that a lot of people, because there's so many new ways to do it, and it's not that typical shooting up in your vein kind of thing. It's just so much.
Socially
it's not as less. It's a lot less intimidating.
Yeah.
So.
Well, also I think that might be part of the reason for the rashes of overdose, because if you get a pill that you're familiar with, one that's been prescribed, well,
you know what you're taking.
You know what you're taking, and you know how much you're taking. When you start heating up quantities and snorting and swallowing and all these other things,
you don't know how strong it is. You don't know.
Yeah.
You may have had this last time and it wasn't so strong, so you could use this much, but then you get this whole different batch over here and it's extra strong and you're doing the same amount, you're in trouble.
So I have a question for both of you. Both of you probably know far more than I about this, and that is the availability of Narcan. So for anybody who doesn't know,
there is no availability for that.
And do you have any knowledge about how we're approaching that? So just so people know, Narcan is an injectable that reverses opioid effect almost immediately. It can be short term, so you have to have multiple injections available just in case. But one of the approaches that people have suggested is to have Narcan readily available. I have no idea how we're approaching that.
Go ahead.
No, I personally, from my point of view, only because I have experienced someone go through overdose and things like that, I agree with it. I think that it should be something that should be available, but at the same time, I wonder if that's not making it more of an accepted makes the use of it more acceptable, because it's like, oh, well, it's okay because we have this just in case kind of thing, like, I just don't know where everybody's mentality is. I know where mine is. I don't know where everybody else is. Making it socially acceptable.
And I completely understand that point of view. From a medical point of view,
I think
what
it's a smart
stress is
idea.
harm reduction, just
Yeah.
like clean needle programs. Harm reduction.
I mean, I agree it's a good idea,
Yeah.
because had they had that available when he overdosed, the 6 months before his death, maybe he wouldn't have had so much damage. Maybe he'd still be here, and it's just not one of those things that you can go and get anywhere. But I know there are states that are making it like available.
I know there's law enforcement agencies that carry it now. I don't think we've really had that serious discussion in our department, simply because kind of luckily work in the city where a lot of times ambulance and fire beats us to the medical calls
Right.
that have pretty good response.
And they do have it.
But yeah, and but I know there's a lot of jurisdictions that are a little more spread out that tend to carry it because they may be the first ones on the scene. I don't know much about Narcan other than I heard it works well.
Oh,
It's a life-saving.
just immediately, it's amazing.
I don't know what the cons would be to having it, if there's any dangers to it. But I imagine if somebody's overdosing in that state, you really can't. It's kind of like CPR. You're not going to hurt.
It's like an EpiPen almost, you have an EpiPen for an allergy reaction, and it's going to save your life most likely if you have it in that moment. And
Right.
it's like Narcan is almost the exact same thing, but just for a whole different.
I don't think there really is a downside to it, and with regard to that, I've had many years of experience of having newborns being given that when their mother was on an opioid at the time the baby was delivered, and if you get a blue floppy baby, you just give the Narcan and worry about whether that's the right thing to do or not later, because there really isn't a downside.
Okay.
So it's basically an injection that
Yes.
Reverses the opioid effect. Short
Because opioids are
acting.
depressant.
right.
They depress your system, so.
Got it. Lieutenant, you'd mentioned off camera that there might be some grant money becoming available through Prop 47.
Yeah, we're working on a program with probation to where if someone is violated for their probation or arrested for a misdemeanor, which now remember, the state of California has moved in a direction that even these drugs, which we used to call felony drugs because just having it was a felony, are now misdemeanors, which is a much lesser offense. And if the documentation comes in to them, assuming from us that this person's having trouble with addiction, even if they commit a theft, but the theft is underlying cause is addiction, that there would be more of a streamlined process through probation to get them into treatment. So the arrest would mean a little more because you're actually doing something functional to help that person get out of that situation. I don't know how this program is going to work. I know it's relatively, we're just talking about it and starting it up. So hopefully it has success.
Are you seeing more of this drug use now that these are not felony charges?
Statistically, I couldn't tell you that. I think it's more open now because there's less fear that you're going to be arrested for a felony, which you could do actual prison time on. So, which could be a good thing because people tend to ask for help a lot sooner. They're not fearing the other part of that. But I don't know statistically if the drug use has gone up. It's so complex because it could be going up for other reasons too.
Right.
Just the availability.
I do have one comment about that. I think that thought that people use more of these kind of drugs based on their sentencing, no, that goes back to thinking of it as being a moral failure. These people have a true medical crisis. I honestly don't think, a year or two more in prison one way or the other, I don't think their mindset is that when they're looking for the next dose of drug.
I agree. I think talking to addicts, I don't think you're worried about doing 2 years in prison. All you're worried about is what's going to happen in the next 5 hours.
I think with the criminal aspect of it, I think that honestly the laws should be more towards, okay, is this an addict with a problem, or is this somebody who's contributing to the problem? And I think that crimes that are more contributing to the problem, like dealers and things like that, I think that you guys kind of screwed up with the changing it to a misdemeanor thing, because you're just giving them the A-OK to keep doing what they're doing.
Well, dealing is not a
dealing's still
misdemeanor.
a felony, and I guess the concept behind it is that just like you're saying, you go after the dealers, which is still a felony, someone who's exploiting people in order to make money off of the drugs. And you treat the user as a user, someone with a, you know, that may have fallen into some criminal issues, but
it's
primarily it's a you know, a social medical problem.
Yeah.
My only problem is that there are different kinds of dealers. There are people that are strictly, you know, preying upon the weak, and then there's a whole class of dealers that are basically users that are trying to supply their habit, and it's a little different, at least from my perspective.
Well, there's a whole third category too, which is what I had fallen into, and I wasn't really trying to exploit anybody. I wasn't trying to do harm and take advantage, and I wasn't really trying to support my own addiction either. I was just trying to support my family at the time, and those pills sell. I mean, you can make a lot of money from them. And
how much would a pill sell for?
For a 10, they have the 5 and the 10 milligram Norcos. For one of those 10 milligram Norcos, you can get $5 a pill. And that's a baseline. You can get more out of somebody who's naive and new to it. You know, you can get up to like $7 for them. When you get into like methadone and oxy and things like that, the price is even higher. You can get up to $10. But things like promethazine, which is like a nausea medication or something like that. I mean, that stuff even, you can sell that because they make that syrup stuff that they mix with codeine, and I don't know, it's real popular with the younger crowd right now. It's gross. I don't know. But it's like promethazine, it's for nausea, you know, and it's like you can sell that out there. It's
interesting.
They buy everything now, and it's crazy to me. Especially the younger crowd, like they're just, and it scares me for my children, because I have teenage children and I just could not even imagine.
But even with the dealers, David, we are what I would call a management tool. We try to get some off the street. We make it scarier and harder to deal it. But in reality, as long as there's a demand, there'll be a business. Yeah, and really the key is, again, addressing the demand somehow through education, through better addiction treatment, so that business whittles away. I think you can impact it that way.
Now, I have a question for you about the business aspect. So I know that in some areas of the country, and I don't know if this applies to YOLO at all, there's bleed over into other criminal activities. And the one that comes to mind for me is human trafficking and the sexual trade. So I don't know, I don't mean to make light of the criminal aspect, because we do, I'm sure, have some real predators who are involved not only in drug trafficking, but other forms of trafficking. So any comments about that on the local?
I mean, when you say human trafficking, it's more or less somebody exploited by it. Now I know there's a lot of prostitution, even as close as West Sacramento, and a significant portion of those girls are admittedly doing it to support a heroin addiction. In a lot of other kinds. Like I said, most of our, we found that a lot of our property crime, I don't want to say most because I don't know statistically, but we found a significant portion of burglaries and all those things are driven by the opiate addiction. So.
Kailei, I wanted to ask you, because you had mentioned off camera that you thought that that the epidemic is a lot worse than most people believe.
Absolutely is.
Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah. Like I said, I was guilty at one point of selling my pills, and then, you know, I know a lot of people and things, and so I got to kind of see exactly how broad this really is. And it's not just your typical, you know, homeless, you know, the people that you stereotype as an addict. You know, it's not those people. It's suburban moms who drive minivans. It's people with a nice house, you know, over in the new development. It's kids. It's your babysitter, your I mean, teachers, it's so bad. And it's just like, there's something somebody said to me one time about opiate addicts. There are no old opiate addicts. They either get well or they die. And it's the truth. And there's been, like, Will's death. He didn't overdose, but his death is, related to opiate use, long-term opiate use. I know that there was a boy who died shortly after him who overdosed and died. He was about the same age. Will died when he was 28 years old. 28. That's terrible. And then even going back even further, my ex-husband, his mom, she died in a car crash. She was high on pills, and she was just typical mom, you wouldn't think about it, and she crashed into an ambulance because she was high on pills. And I'm just surprised at how many people, like, come, like, when I was selling pills, how many people, like, came out of the woodworks and was like, you? Like, oh my gosh, I never would have thought so. And you? Oh my gosh, like, when? Like, I never would have thought. It's crazy. And it's so, I'd say people my age are a good primary age of where it's really at, because I know a lot of kids from what I went to school with and things like that are just heavy into it, and a lot of them are at pills still, but they're taking 7, 8, 9 Norcos at a time. And I don't even know how, I have to split it in half if I ever take it, and that's cool for me, but to watch them take, they handfuls of it.
I think that's a really interesting observation, because with some drugs, with alcohol, you've got markers.
Right.
You can smell it, you can, you can tell basically by an interaction, and the same is definitely true of meth. But with the opioids, a person can go a long time
before noticing.
Invisible.
Yeah. It's really
even
hard
to the healthcare providers, you can go a long time.
Do we have any sense, Lieutenant, how many people in Davis are overdosing and dying from opioids?
No, I would say we know of probably a handful of cases over the last 2 years that came to our attention. But again, I just haven't been busy, haven't had the time. I always wanted to see if I can get aggregate numbers from ER, because some of those may have been treated as a medical issue and not necessarily ever reached our office. So, but I know there's been a handful of younger people that were either brought into the ER from opiate overdose deceased, or somebody's found them in the house. So it's a real problem. And for Davis, it doesn't seem like a lot. The number doesn't seem huge, but it's a big number. It'd be interesting to get the aggregate numbers from Sutter Davis to see how many people actually get treated for opiate overdoses.
I'd be interested to know what kind of impact just taking 9 pills at a time would do to somebody.
They function just fine. Like, there was a girl that I was friends with, and she'd want to do housework or something for pills, and she'd want them up front, and I'd give her 7, 8 of them, and I'd watch her take all of them at the same time, and I'm just sitting back, like, waiting, like, she's gonna pass out right now, and I'm gonna have to call 911. And no, she was even livelier than she was before, and I'm blown away by it, because those things knock me out. Like, I take that little half a pill, and like, I'm going to sleep in about an hour, and I'm gonna be out for a while, and she's like uppity and going like she had just done meth.
And how does that compare to like a heroin dose? Any idea?
I'm not sure how it breaks down. I think it really just matters that, like, how they make it, because it's not made with the pills, it's made with the opiate itself. So.
Right.
Yeah, and the heroin doses are more inconsistent because it's a street drug, so it's going to be,
Right.
But the resistance that's built up over time is pretty incredible. I think in early 90s, my first assignment as a detective was narcotics detective in Yonit, and my first case was a woman who was getting pills through forwarding scripts. You could do that back then because they were all handwritten.
Right.
And for the amount of pills that she was picking up, I was convinced that she is distributing or selling those pills. And after she was very candid with me when I showed up at her house, and she was addicted, but her resistance had built up so high.
Yes.
And this was a housewife in an upper middle class neighborhood. This wasn't, what you see as your typical.
And if what you're saying is accurate, they're paying like $50 for one dose.
Oh yeah. Like I said, there's money to be made. There is, and I'm only saying that because it is a problem, and you know, after experiencing what I've gone through, like, Will was my best friend. I mean, over the years, I knew he was gonna die. You know, you could just, it was there, you know, all of the signs were there. And I think my daughter even knew before it happened. And I just don't want his death to be in vain, because it is such a problem and it's not addressed correctly. And I contributed at one point to the problem, and if I can do anything to change it, I'm going to. So I'll admit to my fault in it, you know. And there's money to be made. So those people who are out there targeting people, you know, to make that money, like, that's where it's at.
So, kind of go around the table in the last 8 minutes. What do you see as kind of the path to a solution here? Start with the lieutenant.
The solution is comprehensive. That it's not, you know, we don't use tag terms like war or things like that I guess inspire dramatization. That it's a solution like any other complex social issue. You bring together a team, and that team has to deal with medicine, pain management, and law enforcement. And that the arrests that are made are somehow functional, and that you try to funnel those folks through a system where you treat the addiction. And the addiction becomes, treatment of the addiction is affordable and available. That's the biggest thing, I think.
Okay. Kailei?
I agree. I think that they need to stop treating addicts like criminals when they end up in the system for, you know, crimes related to their drug addiction, and they need to find ways to add programming that's going to be beneficial to them, and not just that 30 days that the court orders, because it's not how you can help somebody who has an opiate addiction. 30 days in a inpatient care is not long enough. Like, it's a very long-term, complex, you know, disease that has to be treated in long-term ways, and there is no quick fix for it. So they need to find a way to approach that aspect of it, instead of, you know, like, oh, well, you stole this, then you're going to do this time in jail, and then you're going to do this 30-day program. The 30-day program is not going to benefit them in any way. So I think I agree with him. You need to have, like, a team form, basically, and come up with a plan to address the issue, because everything that's offered right now it's not working.
So good. I'm going to end on a relatively good note from the ways in which I've seen medicine changing over the last few years to try to address this. So one thing that came about, at least in Kaiser, which was where I worked, is that we had very strong education of doctors. We also had, that was the one thing we did crack down on, because in Kaiser, we typically don't tell people how to practice. You get to run your own practice within the system. This was one exception, because our group did move actively against doctors who were very far outliers, so that was a good thing. So there was an educational change, a disincentive to continue the easy practice of just writing the prescription. We did beef up other treatment modalities, such as physical therapy, but again, you have to have really good insurance to get there. But on the broader note, a thing that happened with the electronic medical record was a very positive step, because now what we have is something called Care Everywhere. It used to be that a patient could very easily doctor shop, and there's, unlike with alcohol and with methamphetamine, which is very hard to have plausible deniability, at least in the beginning with the opioids, it's fairly easy to have that, and you wouldn't necessarily know that the person was going to 3, 4, 10 different doctors and getting prescriptions. But now with the electronic medical record, at least in the big 4 of our systems, we can look up, we can check. We have electronic ways to see what prescriptions the person has been getting and address that even the first time they walk in the door of your office.
I think pharmacies actually have stuff implemented too, to keep you from being able to fill multiple prescriptions like that.
Yeah, so
which
those are
good too.
I think positive steps that have been. There's a couple of problems with that. I think that California tends to be a big leader in that, and I think across the country that's not so much the case. But here I think we're getting a good start on that, even though it is just a beginning.
So I'll wrap up here. I have a few thoughts. I have some positive and negative takeaways. I think I'm concerned about the lack of availability of treatment programs for people, probably the typical person who cannot afford to do it privately, outside of the criminal justice system. I think that's the wrong approach. I think you want to keep people from getting into the criminal justice system. I understand that reduces business, but
I'm okay with reduced business.
but I think it's a problem if you have to get arrested in order to get treatment. So that's a problem. One of the reasons I supported Prop 47, aside from the fact that I generally don't believe that prison is the best approach to dealing with drugs anyway, is that I was hopeful that that money that was used in the system would go toward some kind of treatment effort. It's happening slowly, for sure, but I'd like to see the legislature figure out a way to kick in more money toward that, because that seems to be the pathway to a solution here. I don't want to see more interdiction efforts, really. I don't want to see a bunch of drug raids here in Davis or in Yolo County. I think that is probably the most unfortunate aspect of the quote-unquote war on drugs. By the way, if you guys haven't seen it, it's a very interesting series on the History Channel chronicling the history of the war on drugs going back to the early 60s, just as a side note. A little bit too conspiratorial for my perspective, but there's some interesting things in there. So next week we will be back at the same time, 6 o'clock on Thursday. We will be out in location in Oakland with kind of a different perspective. We'll be talking with Dan Grace with the Dark Heart Nursery based out of Oakland, and he runs a cannabis nursery. And he is looking to locate in Yolo County, and so in August the Yolo County Board of Supervisors will be faced with the decision, and we'll be out there to kind of learn what they're doing and why they want to come to Yolo County. Also on Wednesday, July 26th, so that's 2 weeks from yesterday, we'll be back at Sophia's Thai Kitchen to discuss this time the issue of homelessness in Davis. We'll have Mayor Rob Davis, among others, to join in that discussion. Finally, remind our viewers that the Davis Vanguard is a nonprofit, and if you'd like to support our work, please consider becoming a $10 a month or more subscriber to allow us to keep going. You can log on to davisvanguard.org and fill out the form there to do that. And finally, I encourage you to log on every morning at davisvanguard.org for the latest news and commentary. Thank you, and we'll see you next week.